Hi everyone, welcome to our Instagram live this evening. We'll just give people a few seconds to join, but I think everyone's probably aware that we are talking to the wonderful author tonight, Jayne Buxton herself, who was recently at our conference and chaired a panel, very interesting panel on our food systems, and which we really want to kind of get her thoughts on how all of that went. This evening. We've been trying to do this for a while, Jayne, but we've both been very busy, and it's been quite a lot of holidays and bank holidays and half terms, and people have been away. So we finally managed to get some time to have a conversation with you post conference. And it's been very sunny as well, so I think everyone's been a bit distracted by that.
And rightly so.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining tonight. So as I said, Jayne is going to talk us through kind of some of her thoughts about the conference. For anyone who's not, who I haven't met or don't know, I'm Olivia Quadra. I'm one of the trustees at the Public Health Collaboration, and we are a charity that exists to help people understand the importance of their own metabolic health and how they can feel empowered with the right information and tools to control that and to live a life free of chronic illnesses. That's everything that our charity is all about. We recently had an event, our main event of the year, which is our annual conference up in Sheffield at the Crucible. Hopefully many people were aware of all of that. Some of you probably even were there or had live streamed in, which went really well. And I think we were all just ecstatic on just the fact that it happened, because we've been planning it for so long. But also, after a little time has passed, I think we're still looking back and thinking it was just a fantastic couple of days that we all spent together. And I think we all had a little bit of a kind of a sad time afterwards, after it was gone. So I think that's a good sign. So we thought it would be nice to have some conversations with some of the guys that were there. We've already spoken to a couple of others who were participants, shall we say, or kind of the audience, as and to got their thoughts on how they thought it all went, what they liked about it. But it's really great to have the chance to speak to yourself, Jayne, tonight about how you found it all. So before we get into all of that, I wonder if you could just take a second to introduce yourself. I'm sure everyone knows who you are, but just to give anyone who doesn't just a bit of context as to your background, and maybe say a little bit about your book as well.
Sure. Well, I am previously a management consultant turned author. About 20 years ago, I started writing full time. So I've written fiction and nonfiction and journalism. And this most recent book that I've written, nonfiction, is called The Great Plant-Based Con, as Olivia said. And I started writing that in mid-2019 and researching for it because of what I saw as a great deal of information surrounding the whole diet space, and whether we should be eating meat or not eating meat, or whether we should all be vegan. And I felt it needed to be addressed head on, which is what I did.
You certainly did. And I think I saw a comment on Twitter today which said it's the 1-year anniversary of your book. Is that right?
Well,
around
it is
this
actually.
time of year.
It's just come out, so this is good timing. The paperbacks come out, which I'm really thrilled with. Yeah.
Okay. Well, then that's perfect timing. So congratulations for that.
Thank you.
So just talking, casting our mind back to, I mean, it's only 3 weeks ago, but it does feel like a while ago.
Yeah.
Because so much happened, I think, since then. What were your general impressions of the conference as a whole? How did you find it, and what were any highlights that you took away?
I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And I was there with my sister, who flew all the way from Vancouver to be there with me. And she'd been to the previous year as well. It was completely and utterly wonderful in every way, both as a learning experience, but also as an emotive experience, as an immersive experience. It was fantastic. And really, what can I say? There were so many great things about it. I mean, starting off with just the sheer atmosphere there, which is all about learning, but it's also about openness, kindness, positivity, in the face of some quite negative things that we might be learning. My panelists who came on the second day had never been to the conference before, and they were completely blown away by the spirit that they could feel at the conference. So that's something kind of intangible that you can't really, I don't know how you created it. I don't know how PHC creates it, but somehow it does. So that was one of the great highlights. But then I thought this year it was fantastic to have that mix of presentation and panels, which I don't remember being so much at previous conferences. And I think that gave us a really great way to look at each of the issues being discussed from all sides and really get into the detail and to understand the nuances. And there were nuances with everything. So, the fact that the presenters also served on some of the panels added a kind of richness to that learning experience as well. So those were two fantastic things. And then all the personal testimonies as well. I was completely overcome by Andrew Scarborough's story of using ketogenic diet to heal, to keep his brain tumor at bay. And it had given him so many years of extra life. And I think the whole of the room just fell silent on hearing his honest story. So that was an incredible moment, really.
Yeah, you touched on so many things there that is coming through quite consistently, I think, when we've been looking at some of the feedback. And I do think there is just a vibe about it, and I don't know how it kind of comes about, but one thing Steve and I discussed, Steve Bennett, who's one of our patrons, have discussed before, is that we're very independent as a charity. We're not aligned with any sponsor, with any particular industry organization. And so we really are just here to say what needs to be said. And there's a certain amount of freedom, and I think a certain amount of I think just expression that we have with our passion for what we're trying to do, that's naturally just comes through. So that's really nice that you picked that up.
Yeah.
And the mix of the panels and the presentations, I think a few people have said that was a really good change as well. And so we're definitely going to look at how we can continue some more of that, because people really do get engaged, especially with debates and discussions where there can be an actual back and forth. People really found that to be quite interesting and quite unique as a concept, because you don't get much of that online. You always hear kind of arguments in isolation. So we're glad that some of that's also been coming through. So were there any particular sessions that you got a lot out of? You mentioned Andrew Scarborough, but any of the others that you'd like to kind of highlight as your as what you got a lot out of?
Pick one out, because each time I would think, oh, what's best yet, and then there would be another one. So for me, to hear heroes of mine that I've read their written work, or I've seen them online, or I've in some cases even interviewed them, but to hear them speak, Ben Bickman, for example, Georgia Eade, Patrick Holford, all of these people, and I'm picking out a few names, but it was really special. And actually Ben Bickman kicked it all off very beautifully, because he's very engaging and energetic and funny, and he takes what is a really complex topic, insulin resistance. He takes it and makes it completely understandable, approachable. So those were terrific. And I have to say that selfishly, I also really enjoyed the panel session about, do we need to eat plants or not? And I thought there are lots of reasons I enjoyed it, but it was very special because it did not descend in the usual way to this sort of back and forth argument that usually happens with pros and proponents and defenders of these different arguments. It was very polite. It was very calm. And we did get a lot out of it. And I did think, and I may be biased, but that those who were arguing for, say, a non-plant-based diet, so arguing against the concept of veganism in a way, their data was very strong. It was much stronger than the other data that was presented. And so all those arguments for plant-based diet, they were based on studies that many of us know already have been debunked. You know, the China study, the Adventist Health study, the Blue Zones, you name
Yeah.
it. All were used to buffet the. Really, I don't think the audience was convinced. The audience was polite and listening,
Yeah.
but not convinced. So that was it was a really interesting session.
Yeah. No, it's great to get your thoughts on that one, because I know you have been in similar situations yourself where you've had to debate that very specific topic, and maybe it wasn't as polite, should I say.
Exactly.
No, we were really pleased at how that went, because we knew that was an area that people need to be informed about, because they do hear about all of these different kind of contravening sources of evidence, and it's more, I think, it's more interesting to see them all put together and to hear them challenged. And as long as we're doing that in a respectful way, then that is absolutely the conversation that we should all be having. So we were really pleased with that as well. So thanks for your feedback on that one,
Dr. T, because I thought it was that he was able to zoom in, because at one point we were going to miss him, weren't we, because he couldn't get in because of the visa, etc. And he was such a crucial part of that thing, and he added so much value with his encyclopedic memory of studies and points of view on those studies. And then that played very nicely with Dr. Baker, who everybody loves, don't they? Everybody loves Dr. Baker, and he creates a lot of energy in the room. So it was a really good combination, I think.
Yeah, it was. And yeah, Dr. Baker was very, very gracious, considering he didn't have his clothes for most of the time he was at the conference. So he was sitting there in 3-4-day-old clothes doing that debate. I think his suitcase arrived as the conference finished. So yeah, we're very grateful to him. He was also queue combing on the first day when we had a long line of people trying to enter. He was out there entertaining the crowds for us. So he did help us in many ways to keep things all ticking along nicely. So thank you, Sean, if you're listening. So moving on to your panel on day 2, which was the last panel of the day, and you did mention that was the graveyard shift, but I don't believe in any way it was, in terms of what it included and what you delivered. But you covered so many amazing points in that, and I just wanted to ask you what you thought of how it went, and what you think the key points were that you managed to make sure came out.
Yeah. Well, it went very quickly is what happened. So I realized that 50 minutes is really not a very long time to discuss something as complex as the environmental impact of cows. But my panel is really pleased with it. They did their absolute best. And, I think we had all the components to get to at least give people a flavor of what the issues are that need to be considered. So we had Sheila Cook, who works with farmers all the time for the Savory Foundation, and therefore knows, she's seen live on many farms the regenerative effect of cattle on soil, for instance, and she talked at length about that. We had Finlo Costain, who's looked at the intricacies of measurement systems, for instance, methane management and measurement, and why it is we sometimes get that wrong. And he's worked with policymakers on trying to get them to understand that it's a complex subject and that we may be, looking at it in far too simplistic a way. We then had Gillian, who talked about the link between how cows are raised and the nutrition they then deliver in the food that they give us. And then we had the farmer at the end, who's doing this on his own farm, regenerative dairy farming, and cracking a few jokes along the way too. So I was really happy with that. I think that perhaps it went so quickly that some people may have got a little bit left behind. And I remember I read a comment on Twitter shortly afterwards that said, yeah, great panel, but it was like an IQ test. So in people's minds might have been just reeling from some of the terms. I mean, when you talk about measuring methane, for instance, GWP 100 and GWP star, well, some people's eyes are going to glaze over, and they're just not going to take that in or understand it. So I think it was just great to begin to push those ideas through. And I think it was really fantastic that at a health conference, we were even addressing the issue, because usually the two things are very separate. And I know that at many environmental conferences, they never consider the health issue. So it was good that we were considering both. And I think that those people who believe that omnivorous eating and that the animal foods play some role in really healthy eating for metabolic health, those people in the audience who believe that need to understand the environmental arguments so that they can be armed to be activists for that. Otherwise, they're just, they have nothing to say back when they get accused, when the cows get accused, which they always do. So I think it served its purpose, and I hope we'll explore maybe some other angle on that next year.
Yeah, I totally agree that it gave a fantastic introduction and showed the breadth of the issues that come into play, and they're explored very well in your book as well. And they're not something that you can simplify and talk about in 50 minutes and get a layman to understand. I don't think that is possible. But I do think that if people do want to understand it, it is, it does take some repeating of some of these pieces of information, and of course we want to try and find ways to make it simple for people to take it on. But I do think Finlow's TED Talk, for example, is a great place to start to get an idea as to what he means when he talks about GWP star. And I've had to watch that probably about 10 times before it's really kind of clicked in my head. And I think if people are genuinely interested, that is what we have to do. And I think when your panel is more public and on YouTube, I think it will be one that I think people will watch again and again to get more out of it, because every time I've watched it since, I've got more out of it, and there were some fantastic points made. I think Sheila was fantastic. Her, I was expecting her to know a lot because she's, linked to Savory and the Savory Foundation. But I wasn't expecting for her to be so warm and engaging and passionate about what she was talking about. And that really kind of hooked me in quite a lot to what she had to say. But the way she described the carbon and the need for carbon to be sequestered into plants and the desertification that's going on, and explained that carbon cycle system was very well done, and I think will be something that people watch this and say, oh, I understand it now. And if you watch it 2 or 3 times, you will understand it. It's complicated, but it's understandable, I think.
I'm glad she did that, and I think I said at the end of it, it sounded like poetry to me, the way she did it. I mean, she did so beautifully, and she did feel passionate. And Sheila also felt passionate, as she said in the session, about the welcome she'd had there and how interested people were in what she was talking about in a health conference, and that was so unusual for her. So yeah, it was a great experience for her and for the audience, I think. Yeah.
I think she said she asked everyone to put their hand up if they'd heard of Alan Savory, and she couldn't believe how many people had heard of him. And I think that's a good sign as well, because I think people in this space are very naturally interested. They're always trying to find out more about how to defend their choice of eating, as you said. So I think they will find your talk extremely beneficial when it does come out. So yeah, are there any other thoughts you had to add about your panel?
On the panel, I just think it would be great if we could, as I said, take that panel to another level next year. Maybe explore one of those topics in detail so that people can really get a handle on it. Perhaps next year we could be brave enough to even have somebody who doesn't believe that. So in the same way that the plants and animal foods panel had slightly opposing points of view, which were debated, we could do that next year. And that does take bravery, and it might be awkward, but I've seen the way it's been handled at PHC, so I think it would work in that context.
Yeah, that's a really great insight. We've talked about that ourselves actually recently, because it is the one topic, in fact there's so many topics, but it is one topic that does meet with another viewpoint very quickly if you were to try to understand this one. And even when you understand it, then testing it is difficult when you've got someone who will quote umpteen other studies with other data, which apparently is conflicting.
Mm.
And so to arm people with the right information I don't think it's ever enough to just say, here you go, here's some information.
Yeah.
If you really want them to understand it and to be able to defend it. So that's a really great insight. I think we totally agree on that. And do you think there's more we could talk about in terms of the links to, because I really liked what Gillian was bringing to the table about the link to the foods that we eat and how animals are raised. I think one thing she mentioned was that, I think she brought up a few times, is that the level of omega-6 and grain-fed beef was something that was a potential issue, and I think she said we should be much more focused on what cows are eating. I mean, do you think there's any concerns about what she said there? Because that would potentially mean that people, obviously can't afford grass-fed beef or grass-finished beef in this country, that they may have to look at, and there's something that people, obviously the average person will find that more costly. Is that a concern that you had at all in terms of what she raised there?
Yeah, no, I didn't have any concerns, but I do recognize, because that's what she's saying is factual. So we can't pretend that that isn't true, that what animals eat does affect the meat and the milk that they produce, and that affects our own health. So just because we have issues to do with affordability or acceptability of that idea doesn't mean that we can ignore it. So I think we do have to keep talking about that. And somebody else who talks about it at length is Dr. Fred Provenza, who writes in great detail about why and how what animals eat impacts the food that we eat and our own health. So it is a topic we can explore in much more detail, I think, and it might be a good one to do. The affordability issue is something that I grappled with in my book, and that I know I've talked to you about before. I've talked to everybody about. Do you say to people, grass-fed beef, and particularly grass-fed in a particular way, is much better for your health, so you should eat that, and don't eat the other? Or do you say, aspire to eat as much of that beef or the animal sort of dairy as you can, while still making sure you meet your protein needs with whatever you can afford? Because I think it remains true that some quality protein is necessary for everybody, and we all know what I mean by some quality protein, what quality protein is. And I don't think it's broccoli, and I don't think it's tofu. So people need that, and people on lower incomes need to be able to afford that. And we need to balance that and walk that fine line of encouraging the best while also giving people access, to the extent that we can, to some protein that is maybe not ideally raised. And until policymakers start to help farmers to transition to more grass-fed regenerative ways of raising, until public sentiment makes that a generalizable, scalable kind of farming, we will be dancing on this pinhead and walking the line between the two. But I'm hopeful that in the future, maybe we won't be discussing that. Maybe all the meat that we eat will be raised in a way that is optimal for human health. Yeah.
I mean, and you're right. We need to start with what we aspire to, and then we need to figure out how we create a system that allows us to be able to afford that, across the population. And it's not going to start by us not talking about it. We have to try and figure these problems out. And I think another point related to that Finlay raised, which I thought was interesting, was that he agreed that we do need to reduce our meat consumption. But he mentioned that should come from the kind of the pig and poultry areas of livestock. I wonder what you thought about that.
No, Finno and I have had conversations about that, and I do agree with him, and I knew he was going to say that, because and his rationale, the poultry and the pigs are the ones that are mostly fed, almost entirely fed on grain, which may be raised forested land and with fossil fuels and all of those other things. So that's the bugbear. It's not cows, and it's not particularly cows in this country the way we usually raise them on grass. So
Yeah.
that is a problem, because chickens represent the large bulk of the animals that are consumed for food every year. So to say that we need to raise them differently means, if we need to raise them differently in the way that, say, Joel Salatin raises them, where they follow cows around and eat the flies and little bits of alfalfa that are thrown, discarded. If we raise it that way, we won't have as many chickens. So therefore, there will be less meat consumed. So it's sort of, we need to look at the way we're producing things and work backwards to, okay, how much meat does that give us?
Yes, yeah, that would have been something we would have great to dug into more, as you said. There's so many of these points that probably warrant their own discussion in its entirety. So many points I think we picked up this year. We think, oh, that would be great to explore next year in a bit more detail, as you said. So I hope that's kind of giving everyone a bit of a flavour of some of the aspects that were discussed. It did feel like such a great, I think you even said it was a bit of a whirlwind tour of everything that is in this space, but such a great way of bringing that to the public and to people out there that want to just have an idea what is going on. If people that all they hear right now is about how we need to reduce the amount of meat that we eat, if there is a different viewpoint, what is going on in that viewpoint? Is it something I can actually find out more about and actually have some confidence in, or is it so alternative that it's almost hasn't got any legs? And I think what this panel did was show that there is a lot more to the other side of the argument than maybe the kind of average person would expect, and it is worth understanding all of this more. And we really hope that we can bring these pieces of information, these facts, these arguments to life in a way that people can understand even more as we go through the year, and obviously at our conferences as well. So thank you so much for what you have done to bring that together so well at our conference this year. So I just wanted to also mention that that we, if people do want to watch the playback of this year, it is still available up until the end of June, and it's available on our website under the conference link, where you can buy the live stream tickets, and they have the playback of the whole 2 days. So you'll be able to see Jayne's fantastic panel, as well as the plants versus meat panel, and Ben Bickman and everyone that we mentioned today. You can choose one of the 2 days, or you can get access to both the days. You only have until June to do that, end of June to do that, and then thereafter we'll be providing access to each one as they get edited and productionized over the coming months. So if it's something you want to watch sooner rather than later, then you have until end of June to kind of look at that.
I've got it
on our website.
I want to watch every single one again, so I've diarized a couple of days where I can just sit down and I can take it all in.
Yeah, try and sit above your laptop or whatever you're watching it on to get that feel of looking downwards, which I think was really nice. I don't have any other questions for you. Is there anything else that you would like to share, or that you would like to make sure we say to everyone who is either there or thinking about watching it, that you'd like to make sure they know, or that they know about from the conference?
Well, I guess I would like to sort of have a crack at thinking, okay, what do we do after a conference like that? How does that change what we do? And how can we help push the learning out into the community? Because we had a lot of learning in that room. How do we share it? And I think really there are a few things which I think a lot of people in that room will do, which is embrace the nuance, embrace the difficulties around some of these subjects, so that the next time you're in a conversation with someone who feels it's very black and white, who feels, for instance, that saturated fat is bad for you and you must never eat it and is the cause of heart disease, or cows cause methane and therefore you mustn't eat meat, any of those simplistic diametrically opposed kind of positions, just I encourage people to say, well, maybe it's a bit more complicated than that. And here are some questions we might ask about that. Is it that simple? Is it that black and white? And I think if we can just keep pushing the idea that these things are not so simple, that there are alternatives out there in the community, we will start to have better conversations in, with our policymakers in public discourse. And it's up to all of us to try and push that learning a little bit. And that's a big ask, but I think that's why people go to those conferences, because they want to learn themselves, but they also want to share.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would totally agree with that. And hopefully when we are able to share your talk on YouTube, there'll be many more people that will have access to that information as well, and be able to do the same. So thank you for adding such a great piece of content to the conversation. And I think I'll just see if there's anyone who has any questions, because I did turn the questions on at the beginning. So if anyone does have any, please feel free to type them in. Oh, I think someone is asking, do you have any plans to write another book, Jayne?
I have vague plans to write another book. I've talked to various people about this, to write a shorter version, which is aimed at maybe children, teenagers, and can address their specific concerns around these issues. That's one idea. I'm also working on an idea for a documentary with a company. And of course, that takes ages, and we're at very early stage, but I would hope that at some point in the future, there might be a documentary that talks about some of the issues that I discuss in the book.
Well, that sounds very exciting, and hopefully something which will be equally successful as some of the other documentaries that provide alternative views.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, we don't have any other questions. So thank you everybody for joining this evening. Jayne, it's been a pleasure to talk to you once again, and I'm sure we will talk in the future, not too distant future. So thanks again, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Good night.